An introduction to the English Romantic movement by an English teacher.
Romantic. You probably think you know what that word means, don't you? Well, you're wrong. I mean, seriously wrong. Like, way off. The word romantic today may be all about fluffy feelings and soft-focus films and candlelit dinners and really, really stupid padded hearts on Valentine's Day cards. But that's not what the word means when we talk about the Romantic movement. This was all about rebellion, about being yourself, about powerful emotions like terror and anger and love, about taking risks and having adventures, and sticking a big fat finger up to people who told you what was good and respectable and decent. You know, like teachers. The things that the Romantics couldn't stand can be roughly wrapped up in another historical movement in Europe, known as the Enlightenment. This was very much created by rich and powerful men, the social elite of their day, who believed in science, reason, logic, progress, and controlling how people lived their lives through politics, the law, the church, education, etc. The Romantics hated a lot of that, and used their poetry, their music, their paintings, and so on, and the way they lived their lives, to rebel against it. They were inspired by two huge events going on at that time. The French Revolution, which saw ordinary people destroying the monarchy and the ruling class of an entire country, and our very own Industrial Revolution, in which science and technology changed absolutely everything. And it all happened not so long ago, roughly from 1770 to 1850. 80 years that changed the world.
Folklore, not high art.
The Romantics liked the idea of their art being natural and spontaneous, and for everybody. They rebelled against the poetry that they'd grown up with, which was so clever and sophisticated, but hard to read, and aimed at scholars and aristocrats. The Romantic poets started to take notice of folk stories, ballads, popular songs, and so on, and began to use that kind of simpler, more ordinary language in their poems. William Blake and William Wordsworth were good examples of this. Oh, by the way, not all these poets were called William. Some were called John, George, Samuel, and even Percy, though that wasn't his fault.
Shakespeare, not classical drama.
The Romantics were deeply inspired by Shakespeare. Yes, I know, he's another William, isn't he? Because they saw him as a rebel as well. When Shakespeare's plays became better known, critics looked down on them because they weren't classical enough. They broke the rules. A proper play shouldn't mix comedy and tragedy, or mix great rulers in their castles with ordinary people down the pub, or have all sorts of plots and subplots tangled up together. The Romantics saw Shakespeare as a champion of the individual, of folk culture, of you and me, really. Well, you anyway. Obviously, I'm far more high class than you lot.
Gothic and medieval, not modern.
You know how popular vampire stories seem to be at the moment? Well, the Romantics loved that kind of stuff. We call it Gothic, and it's dripping with blood, horror, the supernatural, and it looks back to medieval times. You can see how it suited the Romantic soul. They saw Gothic fantasy as a way of letting their imaginations go wild, breaking the conventions of their day, so they could explore the dark side of being human. One of our Romantic poets was Percy Shelley, whose second wife was Mary Shelley. Heard of her? She wrote Frankenstein. And like that amazing story, which scared the underpants of its 19th century readers, Romantic poetry explores hysterical and passionate feelings and ordinary people at the mercy of dark and terrible forces. A bit like one of Miss A's lessons. The Romantics didn't like the idea that life always makes sense and can be understood and controlled. They knew that life can seem terrifying, mad, extraordinary and wild, and they tried to reflect this in their writing. You can see this in the poems of William Blake, the earliest of our Romantic poets. He used ancient religions, folk tales, myths and legends, Christianity and so on to create some amazing poetic fantasies. Blake's day job was as an engraver, a kind of artist, and he illustrated many of his own poems with extraordinary and sometimes grotesque pictures.
Romantic love, not just marriage contracts.
The Romantics did explore the emotion of love, and saw love as the driving force behind just about everything. Remember, though, it wasn't touchy-feely love. It was passionate, sexy, out-of-control love. Really, it was the Romantics who created the idea that every individual has the right to be in love, and that sexual love is essential for a successful marriage. Before then, in medieval times, being in love was seen as a serious mental illness. Even in the time of the Romantics, marriage was generally seen as a way of getting more money, land, or power, and nothing to do with sexual love. The Romantic poets often had very unconventional views about love, sex, and relationships. For example, William Blake believed in free love. And many of these poets were very relaxed about having sexual relationships and writing poetry with a more erotic content than writers had previously dared to.
Individualism, not fixed roles in society.
Now, this bit is important. So stop picking your nose, Louisa, and pay attention. The Romantic movement did a great deal to develop the ideas of people as individuals. Until then, nobody really bothered about working out their identities. God put you on earth to be a tradesman, or a craftsman, or a wife, or a queen, or a peasant, and that was that. Done deal. Get on with it. Modern ideas of finding out who you are, of teenage rebellion, of having choices, rose from the Romantics. The Romantic poets often put their ideas into practice. They had a habit of living recklessly and dying young. They had affairs, took drugs, joined wars, and had pretty chaotic lives. Percy Shelley ran away with a 16-year-old girl who later drowned herself. Then Shelley married 16-year-old Mary a few weeks later, but Shelley himself drowned accidentally, aged 30. John Keats's parents both died before he was 15. His brother died when Keats was 23, and he himself became ill and died when he was just 25. Lord Byron slept with just about everybody, including his stepsister and Mary Shelley's sister. He died at the age of 36 in Greece, where he'd gone to fight in a civil war. Get the picture? They talk the talk and walk the walk.
Nature and countryside, not industrialism and cities.
The Romantic poets were famous for being sickened by the growing industrialization of Britain, and rebelled against this too. They found tremendous inspiration in nature and the countryside, and used their poetry to condemn the appalling lives that poor people increasingly suffered in our new industrial society. William Blake wrote poetry based on the sufferings of children forced to work in factories, down mines, or up chimneys. Blake went for long walks in the poor parts of London, and saw for himself the horrific conditions in which the industrial poor lived. In some areas, the average life expectancy dropped to 29 years old. In 1842, a German visitor to Manchester noted that he had seen so many people in the streets without arms and legs that it was like living in the midst of the army just returned from a campaign. Before then, the natural world had been seen as a threat, or even as downright evil. Human beings and nature were enemies of each other. However, as industrialization began to destroy huge areas of the English landscape and drove millions of people into the cities, the Romantic poets celebrated the feelings of awe and wonder that the natural world gave them. Just as they explored powerful emotions, they also explored inspiring sights and scenery. In June, we're all off for a weekend in the Lake District, which is so strongly associated with William Wordsworth and Samuel Coleridge that they are known as the Lakeland Poets. I wonder if we'll be as inspired as they were. I wonder if we'll fall in any lakes. I wonder if our lives will ever be the same again.